This is the FM Gold channel of All India Radio. In the program News Analysis, now we bring you a discussion on GST Feedback Day. The participants are A.K. Bhattacharya, Economic Analyst, and Shishir Sinha, Journalist.
Sir, how do you see the Feedback Day? What is the importance of Feedback Day?
It is a new initiative that was launched in July 2017. It's a major reform. It's a major indirect taxes change in the country. And almost 2.5 years or 2 years, a few months later, the government looks at it as an opportunity to get feedback from various stakeholders, including consumers, taxpayers, tax collectors. So it's a comprehensive exercise to understand where the rollout of the GST has taken the economy to, and what kind of modifications or changes that are needed to be introduced to keep the GST achieve its final goal of becoming a good and simple tax.
The new return filing system will be in place from April 1, 2020. And we have just 2.5 years or say less than 3 years when we will have a new return mechanism. Do you think that this is the right time to bring in new return mechanism?
Well, I think the tax administration authorities people have looked at various options. It is true that too many changes in a short span of time can cause a kind of disruption that should be avoided. But one has to see what kind of features are included in the new return format. And expectation is that they will be more user-friendly. They will lead to fewer glitches than what were witnessed or encountered earlier. So one can take a fresh look at only after seeing how the new return form actually operate in the system. Having said that, let me also say that the GST system, while itself has become a little more robust, but too many changes, not just in the format or the return filing methodology and everything, and also the rates have actually created some uncertainty which should have been avoided for a new taxation system like the goods and services tax.
So we have almost 1.30 crore assessee under GST, and if we compare with the previous indirect tax system of center as well as the state, the number was something around 66 lakhs or 67 lakhs. So it's almost double. Now, out of 1.3 crore, nearly 1 crore people have to file return on a monthly basis, and some remaining 17 or 18 crore, and more than that, they have to file return on the quarterly basis. Now, the problem is that the number of returns are very less in comparison to the number of total assessee. If we say 1.3 crore, we get something returned like 80 lakh or sometime it is 90 lakh.
Last month it was 77 lakh.
77 lakh. So of course it's a monthly return, and if we include the quarterly return which are filed on a gap of 3 months, so that will take something around 80 or 85 lakh or 90 lakh. Of course the number is less than what we are expecting. Where is the real problem? Is it the issue of digital knowledge, or is it the return forms which are too complicated, or people are not very much sure that if they don't file the return, what kind of difficulty they are going to face?
Well, I think there is natural reluctance on the part of many tax entities or taxpayers to come into the system. Even though they may have registered themselves, some of them are not filing return because they believe that they are under the composition scheme. So therefore, they are not really worried because they cannot claim any input credit. So the input credit loss is not going to matter to them. And some taxpayers may be facing difficulties because they are largely in the unorganized sector, small enterprises who may not necessarily have the facilities of a computer. So the GST Suvidha Kendras that network may need to be expanded. A kind of an outreach program may have to be introduced. Having said that, if the tax return filing has reached a point of 77 lakh, as we saw last month, out of a total registration that you are saying is 1.3 crore, I would not say that this is a bad performance. If you look at any new tax regime, the compliance comes over a period of time. If you want to improve compliance in a hurry, you might see a lot of resistance and a lot of other controversies associated with the new tax system. So it is probably better to introduce such a major fundamental change in the taxation system in a slow and steady process. I agree that compliance is a big issue, and one of the many reasons of why the monthly collections have not reached the target level that were given in the budget
1 lakh crore plus
is also to a great extent is because one is many tax rates were reduced in the interim, and second is the returns have not been filed by every entity, so therefore there is a gap. So I think what we need to work on a GST Feedback Day is how to make sure that more people file returns. On the other hand, what we do see is that the system is working quite smoothly. We have not had any reports of any disturbance or excesses committed by the tax authorities. So the taxman is looking at it and treating this issue with a soft touch. So therefore, the attempt is to let GST grow its roots, and then once it becomes part of the taxpayer's habit and they get used to the new technology, the new format, the regimen of filing returns, then I would imagine the government will bring in other elements of its policy apparatus to make sure that collections go up and people file their returns.
And we should not forget that the collection depends upon how many returns have been filed, because GSTR 1 and GSTR 3B, that gives the real picture of what is the liability and how much taxes you have already paid. And accordingly, the government is in a position to say that this much collection is there. Now, coming to the other issue which I was discussing, that where are the problems? There are two issues. One is called digital literacy and another one is called digital infrastructure. What is the situation there? People say that we go to GSTN and we find that the system is not working well. So where is the problem? Literacy level or the infrastructure?
I think the problem in small measure in both the categories. Of course, a large number of small and medium enterprises were simply not digitized. In spite of the great Digital India movement, large number of small enterprises are not yet fully attuned to the idea of this kind of digital filing of returns, keeping records in their computer. It definitely has increased their compliance cost. So there is a certain amount of reluctance on the part of a large number of players. And the second point that you mentioned is
digital infrastructure.
I think initially, the early days of the GST rollout, I think the infrastructure turned out to be quite weak, and there would be many months where the last day of filing, the system would collapse. I think those problems have been sorted out. There is need for greater simplicity, lack of complications and clarity on the way a simple form which needs the information only that is given. So, but that is, to my mind, is work in progress. And the third element which we are ignoring today is that the compliance level also sees an improvement and results in higher tax filing and tax payment when the economy does well. Today we are in a situation of an economic slowdown, and at a time when the economy has slowed down to a level of 4.8% in the first half of the current financial year,
4.5 in the second quarter,
and the 4.5% in the first quarter, making it 4.7.
5% in first quarter, second we have 4.5, so that makes 4.8. So economic slowdown is definitely another third factor that why the GST compliance levels have not seen the kind of revenues that you want to see in the exchequer. We have seen a tendency to file the return during the last 1 or 2 days. That is also creating some sort of problem. Do you think that there should be some kind of promotional mechanism that if you file at least 4 or 5 days before the closing date, you will be rewarded like this, or you will get this kind of bonus point or something like that? Do you need to follow a kind of policy to reward them, those who are not waiting for the last date of return file?
I personally feel that paying tax on due dates is something that should happen without such monetary incentives. Once you introduce a monetary incentive, then I think the idea of tax compliant society itself gets defeated. It also creates many distortions in the bureaucracy, in a sense that if you have a few lakh tax officers or employees in the government. After all, it is their job to make sure that companies and enterprises pay up their dues and file their returns. So to say that if instead of on the last day you pay it on the 5th day or the 10th day, and for that somebody is incentivized, then I think you may see some other distortions, other problems that we don't need to tackle at this point.
But how do you discourage people to wait for the last day of filing?
What you should do is that make the tax backbone, the IT backbone stronger. A human habit globally, everywhere in the world, the last few days always see a huge turnout of people who pay taxes. It is a human tendency to file it at the last minute. After all, you are paying taxes. So I think even if you say that if you pay it on the 2nd day or the 3rd day, you will get some incentive, I think you are creating and encouraging a practice that may hurt you later. So it is better to do some more promotional exercises and encourage people by persuasion that you must pay your tax in early days. And most importantly, it is necessary that the tax infrastructure, the IT backbone, should be made strong. These days, it is not a very difficult task that if some people file returns and the number of people go into millions in a day, then the infrastructure should be able to absorb that load.
And government has introduced a measure, I would say a kind of penal provision that if you do not file return for 2 successive months, then you will not be able to generate e-way, which will affect your business. How do you see this move?
I think that's where we need to go. I would say that instead of incentives for filing early, the tax system should move towards a regime where delaying your tax payments or not paying your taxes will not only deny you certain facilities but also will attract some penalty. Like you have seen in the direct taxes, there is now a penalty for not filing a return on the same
due
year,
date.
by the due date.
Means if you file your return by the due date, and from due date to 31st December, the penalty is 5,000 rupees.
Yeah.
And after 31st December, between March, the penalty is 10,000 rupees.
Absolutely.
So that kind of system in the direct taxation.
Direct taxes is already there, and this system was into this 5,000 rupee thing was introduced this year, and there is no reason why the same principle should not be applied in the indirect tax cases. I agree there is a large number of small shopkeepers, small traders who may not be fully conversant, but it is the job of the tax department to make these taxpayers aware. After all, 130 crore entities are there, so it may require a huge campaign, advertisement campaign, but it is not impossible to achieve that.
So filing return is the key for compliance. Now people, rather I would use the word assesses. Assesses have a complaint that the compliance is also affected by frequent changes in the rates. Today we are seeing a kind of discussion on rationalization of rate. Do you think that this is the right time to discuss or even take a decision on rationalization of GST rates?
There are two issues that we need to keep in mind. Frequent rate changes are not be encouraged as a matter of principle, but we have seen in the last 2.5 years that the rates have been changed rather frequently. Those changes have also meant is that they were reduced in most cases. Very few cases the rates were raised. As a result, the government's revenue collections have taken a hit. So the early exercise contributed to two major problems. One, your revenue collections suffered, and two, the frequent changes created a bit of uncertainty on how do you plan your business. Now, I think another attempt is being examined wherein the GST rates will be raised instead of being reduced. The lowest slab may go up, by which to level one doesn't know, but the talk is that they should be raised. Now, the background to this is that the government is facing a revenue shortfall, particularly on the GST front. So therefore, while in theory and in principle, the GST tax rate should not undergo such frequent changes, but since they were changed quite frequently, now it is time to apply some correctives. And I think the government is trying to see that how the rates can be raised, and so that the revenue shortfall challenge can be met.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on GST Feedback Day. The participants were A.K. Bhattacharya, Economic Analyst, and Shishir Sinha, Journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. This program is also available on our website newsonair.com. You can also follow us on the News on AIR app for updates. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.